What is up? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. Back here with some more Resident Evil 7 gameplay for you. And with people getting more excited for the release of Resident Evil Requiem coming out next year, I figured I would talk about something that I hope the game doesn't do, but probably will, but hopefully won't be as egregiously bad as its previous entries. So, Resident Evil has always been a game that has a lot of replayability. It's one of its assets of why people love and enjoy the franchise. But in terms of the last two mainline entries, Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, there's been a small problem that you won't notice the first time you play it because everything's new to you. But when you go back to replay it, it's a lot more noticeable. So you might be wondering, well, what is it? What is it that you're a little bit hoping that it's not as bad or egregious? Well, you're watching it. The introductions. One of the things that I think is very egregious, especially in 7. 7's definitely the worst of the offenders of this. And 8 is not great, but nowhere near as bad as this one. It does have improvements, which I'll go over. But it gets really tedious to just have to go through the whole opening section where you're either doing these forced long walking sections where nothing really happens, or you're following behind somebody, or you have to listen to a bunch of dialogue, and before you even get to like your first actual weapon, it's like so much time has passed by. And as I said, when you first play the game, you won't notice it, but when you're trying to do replayability, or maybe even try to do a speed run, it's really frustrating to go through. By the time I got to Mia in the game where you talk to her, it had already been 6 minutes. And yeah, one big factor, which they did improve in Village that I'll go over, is that you can't skip the cutscenes in Resident Evil 7, which would probably mitigate a lot of it, but you have to watch a whole opening scene. But even if you were able to skip this, it would take a good, 4 some minutes just to get to this point before you even have this. But then, as soon as you start talking to Mia, then you have a huge, long, overdrawn out section where you got to follow her. And when you're seeing it for the first time, you won't notice, obviously, because you're just brand new. You're just absorbing it. But on replay value and just replayability, going back doing it, these parts become real egregious, where you're just like, I just want to go. Can I go? Can I go? And you can't, because you basically have to force to follow behind us. And this takes a lot longer. It's not as long as you go through the actual minutes. There's about a good 3 or 4 minutes here, which is following Mia, but it seems like an eternity. And it's something that I really hope does not continue on in Resident Evil. So if you want to be technical, you can say this kind of started more in 7 and Village. So by the time we get out of this situation and get to the part where Mia actually attacks you, it's been over about 10 minutes, 10 minutes give or take, before we actually get our first actual action in the game. And a few minutes later, you get her actual weapon, and actually, little hatchet and stuff. But it just defeats the purpose. Like, damn, you think of all the other Resident Evil titles, they kind of just drop you right in the action. They drop you right on the scene. There's not this whole long, drawn-out thing where you basically got to walk for long periods of time or force behind someone a long period of time. So, long story short, by the time I get to the part where I actually get a gun and I can actually shoot Mia and then eventually get knocked out by Jack, it had taken me an estimate around, about 15 some minutes, maybe a little bit more. And I was trying to go as fast as I possibly could. And yeah, it takes about 15 minutes for the game to actually truly start, before you actually feel like you're wandering around and you're not, bound by just following things or long walk sections or playing a whole, intro sequence. And that's just way too long. I mean, just imagine there was a whole, introduction to, the mansion in Resident Evil 1, where before you get that, you're just walking around the woods and it's just a scripted sequence where nothing really happens, but it gives you the illusion up that you don't know the first time you play it. But once you know the rules, then it's just like, do I have to go through this over and over? And definitely of the two titles here, Resident Evil 7 is the most egregious. And I feel like they kind of took that a little bit to heart, because when we get to Village, Village is nowhere near as bad because, for one, you don't have to watch the cutscenes. You'll watch them the first time, obviously, to see them, but you can skip the cutscenes. Obviously, you go over the whole sequence where you're in the house and you're escorting Rose in her house, and you do got the slow walk, which I wish they just let you move faster, but I get it. You don't want to be running with a baby. I understand. I get it. Not the first time I've had someone get upset with me because, oh, well, the slow walk, it's to build the atmosphere. Yeah, but when you play a game like a survival horror game, you kind of want to get through things a lot faster, replayability, doing it more efficiently, more faster. So these things, they kind of wear on you over time and they get to you. But as I said before, you can at least skip the cutscenes. So that is a plus. But still, it still has those long, overdrawn sequences where you're trying to navigate a long, overdrawn out sequence where you just keep moving, and however long it takes, and it takes a good few minutes. But as I said, when you've played this thing multiple times, it wears on you. It's the worst part of it. I mean, there's a reason why 7 and 8 among the speed running community are the two least enjoyable ones because of these sequences right here. Because you just want to play the game. You don't want to go through this whole thing where you're forced to slow walk in the snow. Maybe you pick up the pace a little bit because it's the worst part. It's the start of them. And unfortunately, as I said, this one not as bad as 7. That's my hope that maybe they'll get progressively better in terms of not having them be so long and overdrawn out, where they kind of put you into action a lot quicker. Because these sections where they're just force sequenced events where, they kind of hold your hand and they last for a long time, they get extremely tedious on repeated playthroughs. So if we put 2 and 2 together, and I'm assuming, I don't know, in Resident Evil Requiem, I'm assuming that we are going to play as Grace first. And I'm assuming it's going to be right when she goes towards the hotel to do the investigation. So how long would that sequence be dragged out? Where, the first time you play it, you won't notice it because everything's new for the first time. But how many times would that whole sequence be longer than it probably should, where you're forced to slow walk in the area? They make it seem like, oh, you're being hunted, but, everything is sequenced, everything is scripted, so it gives the illusion of it. But once you know how the magic works, then it's just more like, do I have to go through all this again and again and again? I'm not saying you can't have it to a degree, but try to make it even less egregious as it was in Village. I said hopefully it's a pattern where, 7 was the worst by a mile. Village had improvements. Hopefully Requiem can have even more improvements. Because as I said before, it's not like it's the worst thing in the world. It's fine for the first playthrough, but multiple playthroughs, it's definitely the least interesting part. Because when you play through things multiple times and you get to these parts, it's like, I just want to go. I don't want to sit here and force slow walk in this sequence, or have a long, overdrawn out area where I don't really have too much freedom. I just have to go from this point A to point B as quickly as I can. And I get it, when you're playing the game, but and by the way, all these things, they take a while before you have a weapon. I remember when Resident Evil just kind of, they just dropped you in with a weapon. It wasn't like you had to scavenge on site. And I know, I get it, the story, the characters, they don't come in here with weapons and shit. But the point is that you didn't have really these sequences hold your hand and try to help and save you. They just threw you right in the fire. I mean, Resident Evil 2 is the definition of throwing you right in the fire, or Resident Evil Nemesis, where you're basically just surrounded by enemies and you got to figure it out. So that's just all I'm saying is, hopefully 9 can improve on that, and we don't have to go through all these sequences where we're just basically like, damn, it's been like 10 plus minutes before I can actually get a gun. So that's all I'm saying. But as I always like to say, that is my opinion. I want to hear your guys' opinion. Are you someone that gets annoyed by the opening sequences of Resident Evil 7 and Village and hope that it's nowhere near as egregious in Requiem, where they basically hold your hand, force you in these long, overdrawn walks and slow walk and walking behind someone, or whatever the case may be, where you're just like, can they just drop me into the game immediately, so I'm not going through these forced sequences that are fine on a first playthrough, but get real tedious after multiple playthroughs. Let me know down in the comment section down below, but thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Hopefully I'll see you guys back on the next one. Thanks, and I'll see you all later. Peace.